Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for SportsCentury. He would crouch with a big cat's grace and intent, and then uncoil, and the ball would be scorched on the line, heading to somewhere distant. In the history of the National League, only Pete Rose lashed more hits than Stan the Man Musial. Few pitchers could figure him out, and most finally gave up trying. Asked for advice, Preacher Rose said, "I throw him 4 wide ones, and then try to pick him off first."
Just drives me crazy the way Musial has disappeared from baseball's consciousness. It's a crime because Musial was an absolutely great baseball player.
Sometimes Stan will walk up to a younger person, stick out his hand and say, "Hi, Stan the Man." He thinks that people know him for what he did 30 or 40 years ago. Life is not like that.
Stan Musial was geographically challenged. Had he played his career in New York, we would have called him Lou Gehrig.
St. Louis was the westernmost city in the major leagues. Musial was a guy out there with the Cowboys and Indians someplace.
Stan is not a colorful personality, so he needed to have a sports writing community mythify him. And the Bards of St. Louis didn't do that.
You've got a bushel of major league records behind you, Stan. How do you feel about this season as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think I'm right in my prime right now, and I'm looking forward to a fine year.
He wasn't great copy, didn't have enemies, didn't have tantrums.
Consequently, the press ignored him more than they did the other superstars of that era.
But there is a mystery to his life, and that mystery is very much tied into contradictions. During his playing career, no one was more accessible to the press than Stan Musial. On the other hand, in terms of anyone wishing to write about his life, Stan Musial has been virtually inaccessible. Arguably, there's been no superstar of his time who has less reason to be secretive about his life. But in reality, Stan Musial has been as secretive as Joe DiMaggio.
But DiMaggio's secrecy did not keep him off ESPN's list of top 50 athletes of the 20th century, nor did Ted Williams' anger, Ty Cobb's psychosis, and Hank Aaron's stony reserve. All made SportsCentury's top 25. According to a poll of distinguished journalists and sports historians. Stan Musial was number 61.
He's not happy about it. Stan feels there's an East Coast bias. It speaks volumes about Stan that even at this advanced age, he can get riled up about something like that. Fire still burns within Stan Musial. The competitive juices flow, the flame is on, and it's still pretty hot after all these years.
In an image-obsessed culture, there isn't any one thing about Musial you can hang your hat on. He didn't hit a homer in his last at-bat. He hit a single. He didn't swagger around and have battles with the press. He didn't twice go into the military. He didn't hit in 56 straight games. He married his high school sweetheart and stayed married to her. Never married Marilyn Monroe, or the sheer joy and style that goes alongside Willie Mays' name. None of those easy things are there to associate with Stan Musial. All Stan Musial represents is more than 2 decades of sustained excellence and complete decency as a human being.
Stan Musial had an honest and deep interest in how you were doing, how you were feeling. This is something you never get from a professional athlete. They don't care how you feel.
If anybody was ever appropriately named, it was Stan the Man. Because when you think of Musial, you think of the man before you do Musial.
The man, Stan Musial. When he walks into a room, for a lot of people, it's like they're seeing an old friend. DiMaggio walked into a room, a hush came over him. Williams, who especially in later years is very warm and friendly, but still, Ted Williams. Whereas Stan the Man, how you doing?
One of the thrills of my life was meeting Stan the Man Musial. I used to go up to Forbes Field and watch the Pirates play, and he'd come in with those Cardinals, and it made me feel very good the way he treated me to start with.
No baseball player more carefully catered to the fan than Stan the Man.
There was a time when the cigarette companies used to get some of the players to pose for $15 or $20 or $25,000. But after a while, Stan completed that commitment because he didn't want the kids to view him with a cigarette in his hand.
He wouldn't allow a pitcher taken if he was having a beer after a game because he didn't want that image.
A gentleman almost to a fault, Musial could also breathe fire when provoked.
Tootsie Yards used to be the harbor for all the sports celebrities in New York at that time, and I was in there one time with him, and Stan was backed up against the wall as we were seated there. And a fellow I remember from Omaha came up, and he was with a group of friends, probably 5 guys. Had a menu, and he asked Musial to sign it. He said, please. A very nice approach. Stan signed it, and the fellow carefully tore it up right in front of Musial. He came over that dinner table. He'd have choked the guy if he could have gotten a hold of him.
If Musial's eruptions were rare, he sometimes let old hurts fester. One episode unfolded shabbily in 1956. After winning 6 batting titles and owning a .342 average for his first 14 seasons, Musial learned he was on the block.
If you were to mention it now to Musial about the fact that Frank Lane almost traded him, that's when you would see the eyes narrow.
Frank Lane was somebody who believed in shuffling the cards.
He was trying to build a little on his own ego. You know, I'm the guy that traded Musial.
He felt that Musial had reached an age where he was going to begin to slide, and he may have been right.
I do recall him calling and saying that if he could get enough for Stan Musial, he would trade him, which was always a shock because he was a preeminent player in the National League at that time.
Frank attempted to trade Stan Musial to the Philadelphia Phillies for Robin Roberts, who was the finest right-handed pitcher of the era.
The rumor was afoot that that trade was going to be consummated. Musial's restaurant partner, Biggie Garriani, confirmed it.
I'm picking up Stan this particular day, and he come out of the house, you know, and I could see there's something wrong with him. It wasn't the same old Stan. And I says, what's wrong, Stan? And he says, that darn Frank Lane, he wanted to trade me, and I ain't going.
Stan, who doesn't say much, said, I would prefer to play the rest of my career here in St. Louis. And if they trade me, I'll quit.
Musial's agent and business partner, Biggie Garriani, carried Stan the Man's ultimatum straight to the top.
So Garriani told Gussie Bush, if you trade Musial, he's not going. He's not going to go to Philadelphia. He'll retire.
Frank Lane probably realized then that he was dealing with a guy that might have been a little bigger than the general manager.
He was very happy when Gussie Bush put his foot down and nixed that trade and kept Musial here in St. Louis. But if you talk to him about Frank Lane, you start to see a little fire come out of Musial's eyes. If you cross him one time, you're not going to get another chance to cross him up.
Deep inside of him was a competitiveness, unlike Ty Cobb, who wore his flame on his arm. Musial concealed it with a mask of geniality.
The greatest tribute you can pay to an opposing player is that when he steps into the batting cage, everybody stops what they're doing and watches him hit. And we all did that.
A lot of women would come to see Musial. And why? Because when he was up there hitting, he would unlock his hips. And he would move his hips like this, you know, and they would scream and yell.
Stan loved being on the stage. Stan loved the adulation of the fans.
He had pictures in his pocket and pins, and the first thing he'd walk up to you and say, you want an autograph, kid? He had one obligation, and that was to the fans. He came first.
Musial came out one day, and he was signing autographs after the game, and a crowd gathered around. And Stan had his wife with him, and she was jostled.
And they knocked her over. She popped both the knees, and her knees were bleeding.
And she's a feisty little girl. And she got up, and she shoved the fellow who had bumped into her. And they were driving home, and Stan said to Lil, don't ever touch my fans like that.
Stanley F. Musial, swinging Stan the Man. He's the man that thrills the fans, swinging Stan the Man.
Jim Toomey, the Cardinals publicity man, used to go up to Stan before a game and say, "Hey, Stan, you're just a few doubles away from the doubles record now." And the game would start, boom, 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 doubles. Delivery on demand.
He had the record for most All-Star home runs, and Ted Williams in the American League hit a home run. And they said, that ties Williams with Stan Musial for most home runs in All-Star play. And the next inning, Musial came up, and he hit a home run. And the guy in the press box said, give it back to Musial.
I played my first All-Star game in Milwaukee. Stan was pacing up and down the dugout, and he said, fellas, he said, in this game, they don't pay you for overtime. He said, I might as well end this. And sure enough,
Sullivan's first pitch to Stan is swung on as a drive back into right field. A long one. The ball game is over.
In a career bristling with Hall of Fame achievements, Musial never performed better than in 1948. He led in 10 offensive categories, including a .376 batting average that would only be surpassed once in the National League for the rest of the century. He also tied Ty Cobb's 20th century record for most 5-hit games in a season, 4.
It was at Braves Field in Boston. And in that game, he was badly injured. In excruciating pain, he only swung the bat 5 times. 5 swings, 5 hits.
Before a doubleheader, he was once in the clubhouse dressed in his underwear, walking around the clubhouse holding his bat. And Musial was saying, 10 hits for Stanley today. Stanley can get 10. Talking himself into it, talking himself into it.
Although he never collected 10 hits in a doubleheader, Musial had a day to remember. St. Louis, 1954.
One Sunday in May, Musial hit 5 home runs in a doubleheader against the Giants, and he hit another ball that was caught in front of the 400-foot plus sign out in left center field. I'd come here in 1954 from Rochester, New York. Thought to myself, does he do this every Sunday?
If Musial lacked national exposure, it wasn't the fault of KMOX, which broadcast the man's exploits over one of America's strongest radio signals.
KMOX boomed across the country. I could listen to it in my room in Groton, Massachusetts growing up.
From Texas to Florida to North Carolina, all the way out to Oklahoma, Denver, Colorado. The Cardinals had a huge, huge fan base.
Stan Musial was truly a great hero of mine. When I was a boy growing up in Arkansas, I used to, before I ever had a television, I used to listen to the Cardinals baseball games at night on the radio when I was doing my homework. And listen for Harry Carey to describe me under the crouch.
Musial. That's the way he pronounced Stan Musial's name.
Musial with a double, Musial with a home run.
You had that anticipation that something special is about to happen, and we heard that on the radio decades ago with Harry Carey and Stan Musial.
Stan waits. Here's the pitch. Line drive, it is! Into left field! Hit number 3,000! A run is scored! Musial around first! On his way to second with a double! Holy cow!
We certainly want to congratulate you on your 3,000th hit. It was a big kick for the Chicago fans as well as your fans down in St. Louis. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it.
The year was 1958. Place, Wrigley Field. Musial, at 37, joined 7 players in history to reach 3,000 hits. The celebration picked up steam on the ride back to St. Louis, which marked the end of an era.
It's the last train trip the Cardinals ever took.
It was a carnival from one community in Illinois to another, from Clinton to Springfield, with people out there cheering Musial. And by the time that the train reached Union Station in St. Louis, it was near midnight. There were 800 people awaiting his arrival.
Stan said, "How I know how Lindbergh felt." He says, "Hey kids, no school tomorrow."
Stan grew up, to say the least, poor.
Came from Denora, Pennsylvania, which is not far from Pittsburgh.
It was a tough country out there. I mean, it was steel country.
The area was dark. Jobs didn't pay much. All that you had to look forward to here was to work into the mills.
In October of 1948, when Musial settled in St. Louis, his native town was under siege. Noxious fumes that ordinarily poured upward from the tall stacks of the smelting factories descended on Donora for 6 straight days, in a weather phenomenon known as inversion.
If you were smoking and you blew the smoke out, it went down instead of going up.
We lived on the 3rd floor of the building, and I mean, I looked out, I could see nothing, not even down to the street.
Some 20 people were killed, thousands of people were ill.
Musial's 58-year-old father, already suffering from lung ailments, died of a stroke 2 months after the environmental disaster known as the Donora smog. Conditions in the city were little better in 1920, when Stan was born, the 5th of 6 children to Slavic parents.
As a young kid, he would have rolled around the grass on the north side near the zinc works. He would have picked up a yellow residue. He would have gone to the south side, you would have had black soot on you. Vegetation was sparse.
Musial's father and grandfather were among the thousands of Slavic immigrants who came to the Monongahela Valley in search of work. There was more than enough for every member of the family.
His mother would walk her father to the Monongahela River in the morning. Then she would row her father across the river. And then her father would walk 4 miles to the mine where he worked. Then Stan's mother-to-be, then a teenager, would row back across the Monongahela. And in the afternoon, she'd walk back to the Monongahela, row herself across, pick up her father, who'd walk 4 miles from the mine, and row him back across the Monongahela, and they would walk home.
In early 1932, the mill closed in Donora. Virtually everyone was out of work. The unemployment rate in Donora was over 90%. And Stan's family were among the poorest.
They all lived in his grandmother's house, which sat on a hill that yielded enough coal to fire the stove and heat the cramped quarters during long, bitter winters.
We had a shaft 30 foot deep, and we mined it, brought it to this hole, and we had to crank it up with a half barrel, dumped it up on a platform, and carried it up in the shanty.
There were 2 bedrooms, and you had 6 siblings, the mother and father, and at least one of the 2 grandparents, all in a 2-bedroom house. His salvation was athletics, particularly basketball and baseball.
There's a whole culture there around sports, in which sports is an escape. Musial wanted out of the coal mines. He didn't want any of that 90 cents a day work. He wanted to be a baseball player.
And so much was he involved in that, going from one game to another. His friends called him Iron Man.
They called him Donora Greyhound also because he was pretty fast.
He hit a ball out in left center, and I kicked it under the fence and ground rule double. And when I came in, I told him he was pitching, and I said, you know, I beat you out about a triple. He said, how? I said, I kicked that out of the fence. First time up, he put one right between the shoulder blades. He was very competitive, very competitive.
In his Donora High School pitching debut, Stan struck out 17. And when he began hitting for average and power, the Cardinals offered him a minor league contract. Meanwhile, one college held out the promise of a basketball scholarship. The pull between baseball and college tested the Musial family.
His father wanted him to go to Pitt because back in those days, in the 30s, college education was considered really something.
Stan's father did not understand baseball, did not understand why the boy would want to waste his time hitting a ball with a bat. So when it came time for Stan to go play professional ball, his father really didn't want him to go. Stan was so upset he began to cry. And his mother said to his father,
Lukash, why do you come to America?
And the father said, so that I could be free and live my own life. And the mother said, well, why aren't you affording the same privilege to your son?
But the old man wilted.
Signed by the Cardinals, Musial, at 17, was sent to pitch for their Class D affiliate in Williamson, West Virginia.
I was a wild, typical left-hander. I walked a lot of guys, but I struck out a lot of guys, too.
He was mediocre at best, and it went through his mind, was he a Major League Baseball player?
His manager at Williamson in 1939 recommended that the club release him. But he went on to Daytona Beach in 1940, again, Class D baseball.
They carried 17 men on the roster. And when you weren't pitching, you were playing someplace else.
One day I was playing the outfield, came in for a shoestring catch, and I landed on my shoulder. And in those days, they didn't send you to the doctor.
From that point on, Stan Musial could barely pitch. And it appeared at this point that his career had come to an end. But this injury was a blessing in disguise.
I often wonder how smart the Cardinal hierarchy was to keep Musial as a pitcher when he would become this great a hitter.
Despite hitting .311 with Daytona Beach in 1940, Musial was still regarded as a pitching prospect when he reported to the Cardinals' spring training camp in 1941.
It turned out that he was still hurt and that he could barely throw.
The first time I saw Stan Musial, I got a base hit off Johnny Mize, followed with a home run, and Terry Moore also hit a home run off him.
It was at this point that Branch Rickey had to decide what to do with him.
Desperate at the thought that he was through at 20, Musial sought out the man who recommended he be signed 4 years earlier. Ollie Vanek was managing the Cardinals' Class C team in Springfield, Missouri.
Musial did come up to him with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Would you let me play on your club?" And then Vanek commented, "Well, you can work out with us."
Rickey saw Stan Musial in the batting cage and said, "Look at this, look at this. His swing is so level that if you put a coin on the top of his bat, it wouldn't fall off."
Afterwards, Rickey asked Ollie, he says, "Would you want him?" Ollie says, "I'll take him."
Granted new life by Branch Rickey and Vanek, Musial responded by hitting .379 with 26 homers before being promoted to the Cardinals' highest minor league team in Rochester, New York.
He was happy and sad, both. He liked the team and all, and he says, "I'm not going to do anything." But Ollie said, "You'll be in the majors in no time." And, "Oh, you say that."
I was so intrigued with the fella, with his kaleidoscopic advance and startlingly so. And I brought him into St. Louis in the fall of 1941 at the end of the season.
And when he made it to the Cardinals, he reminded Terry Moore and Johnny Mize that he had been that pitcher who had given up the long home runs to them. They couldn't believe that this kid had gone so far.
Everybody started laughing when they saw him walk into the batting cage, you know, and we said, "Kid, you'll never make it to the big leagues with that kind of stance."
He was humped up there like the hunchback of Notre Dame, and we all looked at him and we started laughing, and we said, "My God, look at this young man. Boy, that's unbelievable."
But their amusement quickly dissolved when Musial hit .426 for the rest of the season. Then, in 1942, his .315 average was third highest in the National League, and the Cardinals defeated the Yankees in 5 games in the World Series.
Stan came down to the station with us and told us he was going to go on to Denora, and he was crying. He had a wonderful, kind heart. You could see the character in the kid. He wanted to go back to St. Louis, but he knew better, and he wanted to go home. And he was crying on the railroad station dock there as the train pulled away. He was shaking hands with everybody and saying goodbye.
In 1943, Musial broke through as the National League's most potent offensive force. Besides winning the batting title with a .357 average, he led in doubles and triples, while striking out just 18 times in 700 plate appearances. After earning a second championship ring the next October, Musial spent 1945 in the Navy as World War II was ending. When he returned to St. Louis, he faced a new day in baseball.
In the spring of 1946, there was a new league that was formed in Mexico by 7 brothers by the name of Pascual. They were able to offer large sums of money to a whole group of Major League ball players.
The team that was most vulnerable were the Cardinals, because the Cardinals had a skinflint for an owner.
Jorge Pascual, when he started the Mexican League, wanted one big star. He wanted Musial.
A month after 3 Cardinals signed to play in the Mexican League, Alphonse Pascual and Dodger defector Mickey Owen tried to lasso Musial, who was making $13,500 a year with yards of green.
When they came up, they had suitcases full of money, I mean the real stuff, and opened it right in front of him.
He had 5 $10,000 bank checks that he laid out on the bed for Stan,
plus a guaranteed contract of 5 years for $25,000 a year. And Musial blew cigar smoke all over the place, as Owen remembered it.
All Stan had to do was say yes and fly down to Mexico, and that 50 grand was his.
He hesitated, and he decided he couldn't do it.
He was very smart not to go, because it would have ruined his career.
The wisdom of Stan the Man's decision was dramatically demonstrated that year as the Cardinals and Dodgers battled for the pennant into late September. For all of their rivals' talent, St. Louis had the edge. Musial, a lifetime .356 hitter at Ebbets Field, was the king of swing in Brooklyn.
We had a right field screen, and they said the more dents in that screen put there by Musial than any other batter that we ever faced it.
He got more ovations, standing ovations, than the whole Brooklyn Dodger team combined.
He got his nickname Stan the Man from the Brooklyn fans.
The fans started chanting, and Bob Bragg, the legendary reporter, turned to one of his colleagues and said, "What are they saying? Here comes that man?" And the other fellow says, "No, no, no, no. Here comes the man." And the next day, Bragg wrote in the paper, "Stan the Man Musial."
After defeating the Dodgers in the first pennant playoff ever, the Cardinals won their 3rd World Series in 5 seasons, beating the Red Sox in 7 games. But their joy at being champions was tainted the following spring, when a new player named Jackie Robinson walked out onto a major league field.
Stanley Woodward wrote that the Cardinals, he said, had considered striking against the Dodgers in the opening game of a series which was to be played at Ebbets Field on May 6th.
Ford Frick was president of the National League at the time. And he said, "Gentlemen," he said, "I understand you're not going to play today." "That's right." He said, "Fine. If you don't play today, you will never play baseball again. Not as long as I'm president of the league, and I just signed a new 7-year contract this morning. Are you going to play?" "Yes, sir, we're going to play."
Musial was, in some ways, the equivalent of what Pee Wee Reese did on the Dodgers. Musial finally said, we're going to put a stop to this. We're not even going to have a vote on this. We're going to go out and we're going to play baseball.
Stan Musial was one of those guys who made it very clear to Robinson that he approved of his being in the major leagues. Robinson always credited Stan for standing up for him.
And I asked him about what their reaction as Cardinals was when Jackie came up. He said, we were a southern town and we didn't have any black ball players. And he said, I looked at the Dodgers with Newcomb and Campanella and Jackie, and I realized we couldn't compete.
Choosing not to integrate until 1954, the Cardinals slipped from perennial pennant contenders to also-rans. Musial, meanwhile, played on.
Here's one of the best players in the game on a team that was finishing third. Cardinals were just behind everybody else, and they dragged Musial down with them.
After winning his 7th and last batting title in 1957, Stan remained the man the following year when he hit .337 at 37. But in 1959, after hitting above .300 in each of his 17 seasons, the wheels began to come off.
He thought that he could take it easy in spring training and still accomplish pretty much what he wanted to do. Stan never really got clicking.
And it looked as if Musial's time had come and gone. Hitting .255, wasn't really in shape.
Stan Musial played 895 consecutive games, setting a National League record. Stan was wearing down physically.
He's 38 years old, and people think that you're done.
And it really hurt me because Stan had become one of my heroes by this time. I was very squeamish when I saw Stan being retired by pitchers who had no business getting him out.
I remember very well a magazine article talking about the last years of Ed Williams and Stan Musial. They're getting old. Should they hang it up?
He didn't want to go out a 250 hitter. He wanted to come back and give it one more shot to show people I can go out on top.
In 1960, he was determined to climb back to the heady world of 300 hitting.
He did well in spring training, but for some reason, once the season began, Stan Musial fell into a terrible slump. So Solly Hemus thought that he had to bench Musial.
The Cardinals were very upset with Solly Hemus, not only because Solly wasn't playing Stan, but because he wasn't playing the star black players on the team. They had people like Bill White, Curt Flood.
Hitting .247 in late May, Musial was benched. Cardinal beat writers were furious, excoriating Hemus as an inept manager.
Hemus said, "You got a poison pen." I said, "That's right." I said, "And we colluded to get you to get some sense."
It was the Post-Dispatch and the Globe-Democrat in St. Louis that talked about how Solly was playing Stan unfairly, that he would play him against a lot of tough left-handed pitchers, then he would sit him against a right-handed pitcher that Stan would wear out. The interesting thing about all of this is that Musial did not change in this period. Musial was Musial. There was no public criticism of Hemus in the newspapers.
He made a statement to me. He says, "Don't ever bite the hand that feeds you."
On one occasion when he and Hemus were together and a photographer took their picture, the photographer asked, "How can you be smiling?" Musial commented, "I always smile when I get my picture taken." But there is one glimpse here of what actually was taking place. Curt Flood went into the clubhouse when Musial was taken out of a game. Musial was there alone, and he saw Musial kicking a tub of dirty towels continuously as hard as he could for at least 30 times.
What upset him more than anything else, we were playing a doubleheader in Wrigley Field. I told him he's going to play the second game, and we had not been winning at all. Bob Neiman was playing left field for me. We won the first ball game. I told Stan he was not going to play in the second game. I regretted ever making a statement that I was going to play in the second ball game because he didn't deserve that.
From the bench, Musial privately determined that he would quit at the All-Star break. On June 24th, 1960, all retirement rumors died in mid-swirl. Outfielder Bob Neiman was injured. With his 39-year-old star rested after 4 weeks on the bench, Hemus wrote Musial back into the lineup.
Musial went in and he went on a rampage. For the next month, he hit over 400, and he was the most productive hitter on the ball club.
After hitting a record 6th All-Star home run and 3 game-winning homers against the Pirates in August, Musial set his sights over the next 2 seasons on as many milestones as his old legs would take him.
There she goes again. It might be out of here. There it is. Another home run. 4 in a row for Musial.
Hitting .330 in 1962, Musial, at 41, inspired a talented but young Cardinal club. His presence seemed to bless the moment.
You could feel him in a room. Anytime Stan Musial was around, you got the feeling that everything was going to be all right. I remember we played a doubleheader on a Sunday afternoon. We had an off day the next day on Monday. Stan was going to New York, which meant that he had to miss our flight back to St. Louis. And guys were saying, "Stan's not on the flight. I'm not too sure I want to get on the flight." And sure enough, we take off, and the left engine went out.
It's a kind of a frightening sight when you're 5,000 feet off the ground and your propeller's not going. Well, guys are saying, I knew I shouldn't have gotten on this flight. Musial wasn't on the flight. I shouldn't have gotten on it. We had to return to the airport. They repaired the plane, but the fact that Stan wasn't on it meant that things weren't all right.
Things did not go right at the plate either in 1963. So, at a team picnic that August, the man stepped up and made the call.
This is a happy occasion in a sense, and not so happy in another sense. 63 will be my last season as an active ball player.
Well, it's been so wonderful being with the Cardinals all these years, and it's been a lot of fun, and I just hate to see it end. I think it's been wonderful.
His last game at Busch Stadium mirrored his first 22 Septembers ago. He had 2 hits in each game. Stan the Man's career was arguably the best posted in the National League after World War II. A .331 average, 475 homers, almost 2,000 RBIs, and the most extra base hits in history.
Even with the numbers, he was unique. 3,630 hits.
I got 1,815 hits at home and 1,815 hits on the road.
Commissioner Ford Frick summed up Musial's career in 10 thoughtful words. Here stands baseball's perfect warrior. Here stands baseball's perfect knight.
I, Stan Musial, do solemnly swear. I will support and defend. The Constitution of the United States.
A year after Musial's retirement, President Johnson named him the nation's fitness director.
Stan Musial is a hero to the youth of this country. He demonstrates that being a champion means a good deal more than just winning.
He did certainly believe in the causes that John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson stood for, particularly in terms of civil rights. He saw this as a way that he could give back some things to the community, some things to children, and try to use the name that he had developed.
One problem which is becoming an expanding menace is the use of drugs by young people in our society. Some try it for kicks. Others use it to run away from the frustrations of our mixed-up world.
In 1967, Musial joined active baseball stars on a month-long tour of Vietnam. One of his companions was still on his own path to greatness.
I got a chance to live with Stan for about a month. He's a great person. He's funny, but he's concerned about people.
Then he came to Crosley Field in Cincinnati when Aaron got his 3,000th hit, jumped over the turnstile and ran out on the field to congratulate Henry Aaron. Because I think Musial wanted people to see that. So you should appreciate this fellow. I do.
I did the eulogy at Mickey Mantle's funeral, and sometimes people ask me if I ever came close to losing it, and there really was only one moment. I caught a glimpse of Stan Musial, and in a split second, it occurred to me what had happened. Some people who you would think would have been there were not. And here was a man just recently over a bout with prostate cancer who had decided that morning that he should get on a plane in St. Louis and haul himself to Dallas. Out of respect, no one would have marked Stan Musial absent that day. When you saw Mantle around someone like Musial, you saw a change in him. Mickey was acutely aware of what he was and what he could have been as both a player and as a person. And he saw Musial as someone who was deserving of admiration because he had lived his life and played his career to the fullest, and Mickey felt that he hadn't.
But for all his deep sense of civic responsibility, this man who was never thrown out of a baseball game, this man called Musial, loved nothing more than allowing the little boy inside to come out and play. But only at the right place and time.
There's always a request. Stan, do you have your harmonica? They don't have to ask twice. It comes out of his pocket. Boom.
What you gonna play, Stanley?
Well, we're gonna play something like the Gold Slippers. How about that? All right.
Oh, he plays the harmonica, the accordion, and the bass fiddle.
Is that what attracted you to him, the harmonica?
No, I saw him as a basketball player in high school, and I thought he had cute legs.
Nobody was more adored who's ever put on a Cardinal uniform than Stan Musial. Nobody.
He's tied together all those generations of great baseball fans in St. Louis. And he's much more a part of the baseball culture than I think that people on the East Coast really understand.
We find feet of clay on all our heroes. I've never found any on Stanley Frank Musial. I interviewed Musial about McGuire. This was a time of androstenedione. I asked him if he was on any kind of supplements when he was a player. He said steak and a cocktail. He said they called me a high ball drinker and a low ball hitter.
We were at lunch for his 80th birthday. We got up to leave, and Musial turned around and he said to the other patrons, and there were probably 50 of them, "Hey, it's my birthday." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his harmonica, and played Happy Birthday to himself. There's not a person in the world who wouldn't enjoy being with Stan Musial.
He is one of God's chosen people, and his whole life's been that way. The legend's real. It's true. All of it.
Stan Musial was such an unassuming man, so unaffected by his fame, that even after he had won his third MVP award, his phone number remained listed, and the people would call, and to their surprise, they would get the man himself, and he was pleased to talk to them. He said he felt an obligation to the public. What a quaint, old-fashioned, and absolutely wonderful notion. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.